For the other girls, you've ruined me. You've ruined me. The other girls, they are invisible now. Oh, can't you see? They're invisible to me. The other girls.
That song's called The Other Girls by a group called Shifting Sands. The singer is Geoff Corbett. It's one of a set of beautiful melancholic songs from their debut album, Beach Coma. I'm a big fan of the music, but it's not the major thing I want to talk to Geoff Corbett about today. Geoff has another band that he fronts with his brother Ben called 6 Foot Hick. 6 Foot Hick are internationally famous in underground music circles for their explosive and, it must be said, intensely erotic stage performances. But that's not the main reason I've asked Geoff here today either. Geoff also once sawed a house in half with a handsaw, but I'm going to ask him about that later, because Geoff has got another job. I call it a day job, but it often requires him to work nights as well. Geoff Corbett is a drug and alcohol counsellor, a dual diagnosis care coordinator at a youth detox centre attached to a major hospital. That means that Geoff's got to do an incredibly difficult thing. He often has to talk to teenagers who are in a bad way and might not be thinking clearly about how to get out of it. And needless to say, giving a stern lecture isn't likely to work. But Geoff has to try and reach them anyway, because it might be a matter of life and death. Hello, Geoff.
Good day to you, sir.
There's a beautiful song I just played at the start. It's a lovely film clip of you on a fishing boat. It made me want to drink whiskey and cry at 10 o'clock in the morning. That's your intention, isn't it? That's what you want me to do, isn't it?
That's it. It's not the cheeriest tune.
No, it's beautiful. I wonder if there's something so beautiful about the melancholy of that, though, that draws me to it again and again. What strange people we are, aren't we?
It's cinematic. It's just asking to be put in a Hollywood movie. Please.
Yes, indeed. Am I hearing like influences of Lee Hazelwood and Serge Gainsbourg there in that song?
Definitely. I think that's what we're shooting for in through the years of being in 6 Foot Hick, which is a pretty confrontational rock and roll band. I think I really sought out the lighter side of life, definitely, and those two artists are huge influences on me and have been for a long time.
Let's talk about the work you do, that day job I mentioned. That's not quite a day job. At this detox centre, what do you do when someone walks into there? Someone who's, I don't know, was it between the teenage years and up to the age of 25 or something?
Yeah, 13 to 25 is the sort of the age group that we focus on.
And what happens when they walk through to the door and meet you? What do you do, Geoff?
It's usually a cup of tea or Milo or coffee or water or anything, and that's just the icebreaker at the start. We will engage in often banal conversation, but I think that's the way drug and alcohol works with young people, I think, is that you need to be able to establish some kind of rapport from the get-go. Otherwise, they're not going to give you the information that you're seeking for a start.
Is it fair to say they've already had a few stern warnings and you've got to creep up on them a bit?
Yeah, exactly. I think that what it comes down to is they are testing the water, with you. They want to know, is this someone that I can trust? Because I don't want to be told again that, what I'm doing is bad or wrong, etc., etc. I just would like some help.
What are you trying to figure out as you're having that kind of conversation with them?
Well, the thing with adolescents in particular is that they're really prone to under and over reporting their levels of use. So the conversations that we have with them, we need to tease out what is their actual level of substance use so we can sort of determine, okay, what sort of treatment would be an option for this kid.
So they're likely to say something like, oh, off my face, or I've only had just the one, in other words.
Yeah, or like they will say, I'm smoking an ounce of cannabis every 3 days, or they're minimising their problem as well, they feel as if they don't want to disclose their level of use because the repercussions that might bring as well.
And when you can get them to be a bit more open and to trust you a little bit, how do you break down their situation?
Well, fairly standardised sort of assessments that we use, but it's the way that you present those assessments. So you're trying to just have an hour-long chat, but also get out the information around their frequency of use, what substances they're using, and the function of that use as well. determine if it's just recreational use, what risks are associated with that, or if they got issues with dependency as well. That all helps us build a picture of their, a substance use profile, and it helps us then go, okay, this is a treatment or intervention that might work. We present options, and quite often they'll say, that sounds good, we might give that a go, or they'll go, no, this isn't for me, and see you later.
And can you say come back?
That's what we do. If you have established a little bit of rapport where they feel as if this is someone I could come back to and talk to later when I feel a little bit ready, thought these options through, they're going to come back, and that happens. It can be years and years, and then someone will come back on the doorstep and go, okay, I'm ready now.
You say that the teenagers particularly are prone to over-reporting or under-reporting what they've been using. And there are all sorts of other stories that can be spun into it as well. Do you get better at spotting the truth of these things as you get after a while? A lot better. I guess having worked for a long time in the actual detox unit itself, you get quite adept at seeing what the physical signs of withdrawal. When you've got someone saying that they're using X amount of substances and it was yesterday that they used it, and they haven't used today, and you can get a picture of their use over the last month, you can sort of see if they're in withdrawal or intoxicated or hanging out. You get an idea. What are some of the typical reasons why people, you find young people who come in to see you are doing the substance abuse?
The thing that gets overlooked a lot is that initially most young people seek out substances not because they're medicating their mental health or because they've suffered some trauma. Most young people will engage in some level of substance use because it's fun. Ciggies, alcohol, etc., etc. It's fun, it's naughty. They want to be independent, they want to push some boundaries, they want to rebel a bit. After a while, some young people kind of realise that this is actually good for making me feel a bit happier, or it blocks out intrusive thoughts, etc., etc. So then it goes from recreational fun times into something a little more sinister.
Talking to Kate Holden on this show years and years ago, I remember her telling me how she became a heroin addict, and she said it was kind of put to, well, she kind of saw it as this kind of thing bohemians do. She did it for a bit and enjoyed it and thought, well, I can handle this, and then did it on a weekly basis. It was a weekend treat.
Yeah.
Then you dip it into a midweek for a bit of fun, and then you're doing it every day, and then suddenly it's there.
That's it. The gaps close in. When often people don't see that. The days where they have the break shrinking and shrinking, or the amounts creeping up. That's the nuts and bolts of what we do, is just a little bit of giving some people a bit of insight into how it's crept in a negative way, without sort of being overly judgmental.
You've been in music for quite a few years. Has substance abuse or drug use, have you noticed has it really changed at all since people like you and I were in our teens and 20s, Geoff?
Strangely enough, amongst the sort of rock and roll and I guess garage rock and roll punk rock scene, I think it's actually decreased. You look at some of the artists coming through that were very popular in the 80s into the 90s when heroin was widely available. It was a recreational drug. It was something that, naughty middle class kids who were into a bit of grunge might get into, and some of them were able to put it down and others didn't. I think at least in rock and roll music now, we're not seeing that level. In rock music, we had our dabble with speed and methamphetamine, and most people kind of realised that it wasn't that conducive to a long career or maintaining relationships. Yeah.
What substance causes the biggest problems for people like you?
It fluctuates. It's in a substance use, and the substances that are available it's in constant state of flux, and what we see a lot of is polysubstance use, where by the time someone gets to our service and is referred to our service, it's not just one drug. They may have issues with several. Certainly now, I guess we have seen a little bit of a resurgence of methamphetamine. So 6 or 7 years ago, it was getting up there and it's starting to come back a bit now. But the opiates, there's an ebb and flow.
Is cannabis in any way a problem? Well, no, I call it a thing. Is cannabis in any way a thing?
It's a thing. It is a thing. And strangely enough, and this may surprise people, but a lot of the work that we do is around heavy cannabis use.
What, psychosis induced?
Well, definitely psychosis. A lot of issues with significant withdrawal symptoms, mood dysregulation, aggressiveness, violence, etc., etc. Cannabis, as people have probably seen in the movies, makes people chill out when they're on it. And there's been some great studies to demonstrate that if people smoke cannabis and drink as well, they're probably less likely to get into a violent altercation. But the problem happens when they can't get cannabis if they've been smoking at a really heavy level. And a lot of the time across the years, I guess we've had more sort of security and police sort of call-outs related to cannabis withdrawal from, I'm talking really high doses than methamphetamine.
See, that's different from when you and I are in our 20s. Like the THC content of cannabis is apparently is much higher now.
It's a bit higher, but what's happened with cannabis in particular is that probably back in our day, there was a lot of bush cannabis. So it was grown in the bush and tended to by well-meaning hippies and distributed across the country to those who wanted to partake in a bit of chuff. But then it became something that obviously there was a bit of money attached to it, so hydroponic cannabis became what was sought after, slightly higher THC, but less of the secondary active ingredient, CBD. And that active ingredient in cannabis is found to be protective against things like psychosis or development of depression. So less of that good one and a little bit more of the bad one led to some problems, so increased psychosis.
What does cannabis detox look like?
Well, quite often intense cravings. What complicates it even further is a lot of people smoke tobacco with their cannabis as well. So particularly with young people, they find it difficult to make that distinction between what's a cannabis craving and what's a tobacco craving. So if you smoke tobacco through a bong, a water pipe that's most commonly used to smoke cannabis, if you smoke tobacco through that, the bioavailability of the nicotine is 3.5 to 7 times more than if you were going to smoke the same amount smoked in a cigarette. So you can smoke an incredible amount of tobacco. You can get your pack-a-day habit as well and not realise it. So not only are they hanging out for a ciggy, and most detoxes are non-smoking now, they're really hanging out for cannabis as well. So intense cravings, and then around about day 3, you start to see those changes in mood. So they get incredibly tetchy. Luckily, we're a voluntary a service, so if people want to walk, they can walk, rather than putting holes in walls, etc., etc.
I'm sure doing what you do, people are always, you go to parties or whatever, people are always telling you what they think about drug and alcohol abuse and how it ought to be treated, and everyone's got their own theory. I don't suppose I'm any different to that, Geoff, as well. What do most people get wrong, though, do you think, when they give you their pet theory about what you ought to be doing and how you ought to be handling this?
I think everyone has this, an idea of what addiction is and what addiction looks like. And sometimes that idea of what addiction is very different to how it's described in the DSM-5 criteria. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a list of things that they say this is what addiction is and this is what dependence looks like. So there's boxes to be ticked. Some people have a few more boxes. Some people have less boxes. So the definition of addiction can be stretched. And when you throw, moral issues in around it as well, people have opinions, lots of opinions.
What are the underlying factors behind addiction?
Well, you could break it down into roughly into sort of three areas. There's what's going on inside you, so I guess the biological concerns, so things like what's in your genes, so predisposition or vulnerability to developing dependence to substances, that sort of thing. Like some people are more prone to that, same as some people are more prone to developing schizophrenia. So we often hear stories of people like they just can't drink. They have the one drink and that's it, and then they're gone. What it can often mean is their subjective experience of a substance can be very different to other people in the population. The another thing is the environmental concerns. So
the people around them, you mean?
Yeah. Well, the psychosocial sort of end of things. So peers, parents. So more of the nurture end of stuff. So you got your nature and your nurture. The other thing is the substance itself. So the chemical sort of mechanism of action of that substance on the brain.
The young people you're seeing, do you see a difference between binging and addiction? Like some of them come to you who would be binging and others are addiction, and you've got to treat them differently, don't you?
Yes. So we work from what's known as a harm minimisation framework. So we look at substance use and we go, how can we minimise the harms that are coming from this person's use? So that encompasses binge use as well, and which binge use is something that, at least amongst sort of that adolescent cohort, it's more common for your sort of 18 to 25 age group than it is for, say, your 45 to 60. So it's important that we look at both binge use and dependent use and not write that off as that's something that they'll get over, because that's where they're going to end up in emergency department.
Is there a strong connection between the two, binging leading to addiction?
Yes, yeah, it is. The more binges, obviously, the more likely it'll lead to dependence.
I've known people who are bingers who don't seem to be addicts. It's a funny thing. Like when it comes to alcohol, people who binge really hard and then can go off it seemingly for weeks at a time and then hit it hard again. And, and I've had people say to me, no, they're addicts. And I go, I don't know about that.
Not technically. If you're experiencing some withdrawal from your alcohol use, and sort of peak withdrawal happens about 72 hours after your last drink, well, then you might have some issues with dependency.
Now, Geoff, you had a classic background for a drug and alcohol counsellor insofar as you grew up on a poultry farm on the Sunshine Coast.
Definitely, yeah.
Was that near the Big Pineapple?
It is. I had my first job at the Big Pineapple. I like to say I grew up in the shadow of the Big Pineapple. It's that close. Yeah.
There are jobs inside the Big Pineapple?
Oh, well, I think my first job was the Sunshine Plantation, or Big Pineapple as it's fondly known, was a huge tourist attraction. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people would visit that, every day. I'm talking in the 80s. So my first job was directing traffic inside a foam rubber pineapple suit called Pineapple Pete. And to this day, it's probably the best job that I've ever had. because it was so hot inside the pineapple. The Sunshine Plantation, in their infinite wisdom, hired two people to man the suit. So you went out, waved at traffic for half an hour, and then the other person was in an air-conditioned office drinking iced water in their underwear, waiting to don the suit again.
Clock on, clock off.
It was fantastic. I mean, all you had to do was stand there and sweat and wave.
So your dad was a poultry farmer, but then he got out of the poultry business after a bit. What did he get into after that?
He studied engineering for a while at UQ, University of Queensland, but went back to poultry farming because that's what you did. You had to keep the farm going, etc., etc. He actually really hates chickens. Which is not good if you're a poultry farmer. No, he had enough of them. So he went, I've got all these sheds, I might be an engineer now. So he got the stuff you needed to do that, welders and bits and pieces, and It was quite a successful structural engineering workshop out of a chook pen.
What was the big project that he was working on while you were growing up?
Well, one of the most noteworthy projects that he embarked on was he was asked to be the engineer to construct the steel frame armature for inside of the big cow, which was another big thing.
So your dad helped build the big cow?
He did indeed. Yeah, he one of my sort of fondest memories of growing up was waking up in the morning and walking out, to the backyard, and there's this skeletal structure of a massive bovine sitting in the backyard covered in chicken wire ready to be it had to be transported to Yandina, then it was going to get covered in concrete. But I don't know how old I was, but it doesn't really matter. Any age, that thing is great.
It's amazingly cool, isn't it? I suppose you must have been actually, in all seriousness, really proud that your dad had this honour.
Definitely, and I think it's one of those things that I carried with me later on when I went to art school. It's like you can make big things, and sculpture's kind of cool. And I never sort of really thought of my dad as an artist. He was always that practical sort of poultry farmer that could build anything out of anything. But it stood me in good stead.
I was going to say, so is this the thing? Is the fact that the big cow was being constructed at your place the thing that gave you the idea that you could be an artist?
I think so. I mean, I used to draw a lot, but obviously drawing, I'm never really into life drawing as much, but I used to like making things in my mind. And later on I went from doing, drawing onto painting, onto sculpture, onto building sets and set design and stuff like that. It was a natural progression in retrospect.
Does it give you a kind of perspective of, no job too big?
Yeah, I guess that's what I learnt from my father, is that if it was just head down, bum up, you could do anything. Build a big cow, why not?
Why not, indeed? I might start work on one tomorrow. I think I'm kind of inspired by all this. So you went to art school in Toowoomba. Was there a fertile music scene there in Toowoomba at the time too?
Yeah, there was, and that's I had never been in a band until I moved to Toowoomba, and that was one of the things that because I loved music, always loved music, and then all of a sudden there was, people making art, but they were also in bands, and I thought, this is good. Like, art's good. Don't get me wrong, but, it can be a long time between drinks at your exhibition opening. Music it's an immediate sort of outlet of expression. I've got to get some of this. Can't play guitar, I'll be a singer.
So over time, you and your younger brother Ben started a band, a legendary band called 6 Foot Hick. Well-known underground music circles, like I said, all over the world. You've toured Europe many, many times. Particularly famous for your utterly intense, confrontational music style. Is that something you went at straight away, or developed over time, this kind of absolute red mist madness that takes over the band?
It certainly took a while to get to the 6 Foot Hick that you would kind of know today, but I guess what really brought it on was we had this bloodlust for touring. In the early days, we would tour to Melbourne constantly go to Melbourne, and it's not the kind of drive you want to do on a regular basis and go and play a bad show. So we thought, when we go to Melbourne, we need to make an impression, and we did. We made sure we did. Yeah, if we were there for 4 days, it would be go for 4 days.
When I mean intensely confrontational, I've seen footage of you guys with your shirts off, sometimes completely naked, sometimes your brother Ben literally swinging from the rafters, or reaching into the shirt of a guy in the audience and looping his arm through and singing through that, or directly kissing each other, or kissing members of the audience, male and female, to a point where women come to your shows and actually paw you on the front of the stage.
Yeah.
Actually grab you and...
I know. Not so much these days, but yes, it has been known to happen.
Why aren't you dead? Why haven't you been killed for that? Because they've got to go and sit back with their boyfriends after that happens.
Look, I don't know. That's a good question. I guess clinically we should be. But I don't know, we've managed to survive. It's our 20th year.
Have fights broken out?
Definitely, yeah. Not as many as you'd think. A lot of people think, rock and roll crowds, they get pretty violent, but really I get surprised when there's a bit of a biff, but generally people are there to have a good time.
People walk away saying they will never forget that experience ever again. I've seen this documentary about you that was made, shown on ABC TV, this unforgettable performance where people just go, I can't believe what just happened, and I lost myself a bit there. Do you lose yourself completely as a singer?
Yeah. I do, and I love that part of it. I guess that's what I'm, for want of a better word, that's what I'm addicted to in performing and in music, and that's kind of why I keep doing it. Why I'm rapidly approaching 50 and so I need to keep doing music, because that feeling, it's like the best drug in the world, and it's pretty much free and there's not that many side effects.
It's almost consequence free.
Almost consequence free, yes, yeah.
On air, online and podcast, this is Conversations with Richard Fidler.
I'm with drug and alcohol counsellor Geoff Corbett today on Conversations. Geoff is also the singer with the band Shifting Sands and the co-singer with his brother Ben in 6 Foot Hick. He also grew up near the Big Pineapple and watched as his dad constructed the skeleton of the big cow. As I was saying before, this experience of no job too big that you got from your dad, this obviously led to the huge project of you relocating a house to Macleay Island. Tell me how you went about getting your house to Macleay Island in Moreton Bay, Geoff.
Well, as most musicians do, you need to have some kind of day job, and at that point, my day job was working with a friend of mine, moving houses or sliding houses on blocks, and we'd slide the Queenslander over and we'd move houses from one block to the other. I passed doing stage design and working with my father on building projects has cursed me with the manual skills to be able to do this sort of thing. So I put an offer in on a place at Yeronga that was going to get bulldozed. A developer had a old Queenslander 1905 beautiful place with rambling verandas. I said, no, I'll have that. That looks like a nice place.
So you got it for free, did you?
A very small fee. It was a thorn in the poor developer's side.
So you took it off his hands?
I took it off his hands, but it came with a catch in that we had to have the house off by Australia Day, which meant that I had to work over Christmas, pulling the roof down, cutting it in half, and tarping it up, loading it.
Yeah. Why did you have to cut it in half?
Because it's a big house.
Right.
It wouldn't fit down the road.
How did you cut it in half?
Well, the usual way to do it is with a chainsaw. It's very fast. There's natural lines in old houses where you will do the cut, so later on you can cover it up and you never know that it's been cut in half. So in my place, it was down the hallway. You pull the cornice off and the architrave off, and then you cut down there. But I used a handsaw. It took a little bit longer, but felt good.
Why would you use a handsaw through an entire house rather than use a chainsaw?
Well, because with the handsaw, it only leaves like a 2 or 3 millimetre gap, and I wanted this house to be put back together nicely, so I have managed to put it back with about a 2 millimetre tolerance right through the centre of the house. So,
and how long does it take to saw a house in half by hand?
It took me a little over half a day. I had a few cups of coffee, went through the house. It's once you get into it, it's very zen.
Yeah.
Then you've got the house sitting there. It's been cut in half, and then you put it on the steel, place it on tiny little rollers, and you jack up one side of the house, and then half of the house will roll away a little bit, and then you see daylight through the middle of the house.
So then you've got to put one half onto the back of a truck, in other words.
Yeah, and then the other half on the back of a truck.
Right. Were you determined to prank people, motorists on the... I mean, the fun thing to do, I would have thought, would be to
have a dinner party inside.
Yeah. Or better still, to open the living room door and just stand there and go, what the...
Well, you could be sitting there on the toilet.
Yes, just waving cheerily at passers-by.
I don't know if the police would be into that, but I don't know.
So then you had to... If you had to get it to Macleay Island off the coast of Brisbane, you would have had to drive it down to the coast, down to the bay.
Yeah.
And then how did you get it onto the barge? What was that like?
Stradbroke Island ferries. We hired the Straddy barge for the night. We put 2 semi-trailers on with 2 halves of a house, various police, various other sort of support vehicles, and my truck and my father's truck. It was like the Corbett's Go Beverly Hillbillies. We fitted as much stuff on that barge as we could because that's an expensive part of the shift.
And what were conditions like on that day?
Well, that's the good thing about moving houses. If there's ever a drought, you move a house and you're insured rain, and good quality rain too. So the day before the shift, it bucketed down. It bucketed down during the shift. We got one half of the house up the hill, but we didn't get the other half up, which was problematic. We had to park it on the street, so I wasn't popular with the neighbours for a while, but the house went up and we re-stumped it very quickly, and the roof went on very quickly, but it took me close to 7 years to complete it to a point where I'm going, okay, now I can go fishing.
That was the whole point, was it, to go fishing?
Exactly. I should have just gone fishing.
So how do you go from doing that kind of work to drug and alcohol counselling?
The thing with being on the island and doing that sort of work is you're alone, you're not talking to people, you're shut off, you've got a lot of time to think about anything. With the drug and alcohol work, you're constantly with people. And you're not only thinking about what you're thinking, but you have to sort of jump in their shoes and their head and try and get around their thoughts, because that's the only way you're going to be able to come up with maybe some options that they might want to look at.
So it gets you out of your own head then?
Yeah. I think the two, they're diametrically opposed, but you kind of need both of them.
How were you brought into the work?
I worked in adult mental health for a little while. Funny enough, both the jobs sort of came around from people who were working in the field calling me up going, I've got this job here. It's in adult mental health. You're in a band, you'd be good at it. And then 4 years later, I've got this job here. It's in adolescent drug and alcohol. You're in a band, you'd be good at it. So it's amazing what a bit of rock and roll will supposedly qualify you for.
But there is some truth in that, of course.
There is, indeed. And it's I think a lot of it is being able to sit down and hold a conversation with someone long enough for them to be able to go, I actually trust this person to talk to about some pretty dark stuff.
This is just from my perspective, from just seeing how people react to these things, is that once someone's an addict, it seems to me anyway so far that abstinence is the only thing that ultimately works. I've seen alcoholics sort of try and delude themselves over the years by saying, oh, look, if I can just get to a point where I can just have a couple of beers a day. Yeah, and that never works. And it just doesn't seem to work. I know. What do you think about that, Geoff?
That comes down to what sort of addict are they? Is there a genetic predisposition? Is it just too difficult to have one drink? Or is the environment that they're in, is alcohol use just normalised to the point where it is nigh impossible for them to be in that environment and have just one drink? Some people can respond really well, can have dependent use and still respond really well to smaller, less intense interventions and be able to
be weaned off.
Yeah, have a few drinks. Maybe not use for 3 months. And then be exposed to it a little bit and learn some coping strategies. Maybe I don't need to get absolutely trolleyed. That's the trick.
It's terrible watching an addiction, the process of how the addiction distorts the personality. It's the old Roman phrase, in vino veritas. I don't believe that at all, actually. I think alcohol and other drugs, a misuse of it distorts the personality, makes them people that they're not really, actually.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there wouldn't be so much regret associated with it if that's a huge thing, is I can't believe I did this and did that. Most of their time they're based in reality, so they've got to attach themselves to that.
Do you ever have to say that, though, to someone who comes in for detox? Ultimately, when you're ready to have that honest conversation, you're better off giving this up entirely. You're better off abstaining entirely from this.
Look, it happens rarely, but often it will be the older end of the cohort where it's like, we have tried all the options. We've tried them a few times. This is another one. With harm minimisation, abstinence is there. It's at one end of the continuum, and sometimes you have to present that as that's a viable option, considering that we've tried a lot of things and there's still some harm happening here. You're bouncing back.
It sounds like everything about what you want to do is about letting that person make that decision for themselves.
They have to. It's core to it. You can lead a horse to water, but how do you stop it from drinking?
In that situation, of course, you're going to have parents ringing you up and say, I want to force my kid to stop doing this.
Yeah.
What do you say?
We usually get them in to have a chat to our family worker and a bit of a reality check around a sound approach to someone's drug and alcohol use is not something that's going to be done and dusted in 10 days from a 10-day detox. That it probably took longer than 10 days for them to get to this point. Sometimes it can take a long time for people to be able to get on top of their substance use. And the shock and awe approach doesn't work in the vast majority of cases. Obviously, some parents have some mystical voodoo powers that can wave a wand and their kids will stop using. Maybe take the iPad off them, I don't know. Maybe that's the thing that seems to work in my house. But it's a long road. It's a long road, and it's strange. We do get a lot of contact from parents going, can you just make them stop? Wave the wand, magic bullet sort of
begging
thing.
you to, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a story you've got about a 12-year-old girl that you were brought to come and see in hospital. Tell me that story, Geoff.
Yeah, years and years and years ago now, I saw a young girl, 12. She was brought in by police.
Where was she found?
Unconscious in a park. So she said she'd hit her head. She'd been drinking. She was dressed up. She'd been out at a party, and she didn't really want to have a lot to do with me, but she heard me out. So I did my spiel about...
How do you do that? How do you approach a 12-year-old girl who's passed out from drinking? How do you do that?
Well, you sort of ground her a little bit, say, I'm from this service, and what I do, what my job is I come and talk to people who've been brought into emergency around why they're in here. And what's happened today is that you're in a hospital emergency department, and it's not great. It's probably the last place you want to be. They tend to agree. From there, you go, okay, well, how about this? Would you like to maybe look at some ways to address your substance use?
Well, and as you say that, I'm just putting myself in the head of that 12-year-old who's probably mortified and thinking, I'm not that person. I'm not the person that needs to get this advice.
Yeah.
And you know that, though, anyway, don't you?
Yeah.
And so they go, no, it's fine, don't they?
They some of them do, but then that's the great teachable moment of emergency departments, because you can turn that around, and you're in a hospital emergency department. Your drug and alcohol use has contributed to you being here, but you might like to hear me out, at least for what I've got to say. The other thing that is often the clincher is, would you like to learn some ways to reduce the level of harm so you don't end up back here? And most people go, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
But as often happens, she was unswayed.
This girl in particular?
Yeah, she was unswayed and politely declined any sort of further follow-up, which is cool. That happens a lot. Over the next 6 years, I would come into contact with her on and off.
In what situations?
Emergency departments, mental health inpatient unit, street outreach, etc., etc.
And how is she presenting at these places?
You'd saw the decline over that time, but she would...
Is it alcohol and drugs? Or
yeah, a bit of everything. But she'd always sit down and have a chat. But she'd always put the caveat out there, is that if you talk to me about drugs, I'm going to get up and walk away. And I went, yep, okay. Cool.
And does that come from, is she still in that mindset of like, oh, I'm not that person that needs that talking to. I'm not that far gone?
She was still having fun with it. At the early stages, it was still fun. Later on, it was the drug use is actually serving a purpose. Its functional role had shifted to, it's now medicating trauma that I've picked up in a cumulative way from being on the streets for 6 years. So it had shifted from, this is just fun, to now I kind of need it because when I don't have it, I think about bad stuff. How it ended up was I received a call and she said, well, you might not remember me, but you've talked to me over the last 6 years, and I remember that day that I was in emergency and you came up and talked to me about drugs, and I probably should have listened a bit more, but I remembered that. And she said, oh, I really liked that someone would bother to talk to me about that. And that's sort of, I take that with me, is that the conversation that you have, that initial conversation, without waving paper in front of someone, without going, I need to assess you and make a score, just having that talk and getting that little bit of rapport is so key and so influential on getting a good outcome later on. But in her case, unfortunately, too little, too late. She called me. She said, I'm 18 now, I'm in big trouble. Drugs are a massive problem. I said, okay, come in, we'll do the assessment, continue a little bit of a chat. And then I got the word sort of a week later that she was in an adult prison. So sometimes you can do the work, but if the person's not wanting to change, it can be really difficult to even get them to that point where they'll make big change. You can do stuff like motivational interviewing and things like that to try and get them around that stages of change. But if the substance use is functioning in a way where they can kind of live with it, it can make it pretty difficult.
If you're going to put them through detox and take the substance out of their lives, do you have to put something else in to replace it?
That's the trick. You need to be looking at what can we replace this with.
And what can you replace it with?
Well, you've got to look at what role the substance is having. Maybe if it's there to reduce mental health symptoms, perhaps medication, perhaps some CBT or some other intervention to stabilise their mental health so they don't feel like they need to medicate it with drug and alcohol.
When you say CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy.
Yeah, so things like that. So you need to be discussing with them, what is the substance, why are you using, what's the role that the substance is taking. If it's to reduce anxiety, or if it's to make them feel better if they're suffering from depression, or to block intrusive thought if they've had physical or sexual abuse, something like that, or if it's purely an identity thing, you know, they don't feel like they have anything going for them in their lives, and adopting the sort of the role of the substance user gives them something, some sort of social currency that they can trade on.
Is it realistic to give them goals?
Yeah, and it's often really tempting to go in for big ticket items for some clinicians. Like, okay, this is how we're going to get you better from your substance use. We're going to get you a job, which for some people works fantastic. For others, it's a little bit too much too soon. Sometimes a thing like completing a drawing a day is a good thing. Little achievements like that.
Once they've been through the detox process and it's been somewhat successful and they're back in the community again, do you then follow up? Do you actually then go and visit them in their houses?
Definitely. Like, I guess in sort of more recent times, the bulk of my work has been done in outpatient outreach mode. So we'll work with someone before they come into detox to try and reduce their substance use a little bit. So when they come in, they're not hitting day one of detox after coming in after a weekend bender, to try and taper it down a little bit so it's a bit more comfortable. And also we look really closely at ways to reduce any mental health symptoms that are going to cause barriers to them whilst they're in detox, or might make them want to leave. So if we can stabilise someone's depression or stabilise someone's anxiety, we'll do that too, so they feel more comfortable when they're actually without the drugs.
Inevitably, they're going to know about your rock and roll career, they're going to look at the tats on your arm, and they're going to ask you questions about your own drug and alcohol use.
Yeah,
and what do you tell them?
Look, in the vast majority of cases, I redirect that back to them and go, look, this is about you now. It doesn't really matter what my experience of substances was, even if there was any. You are, in a lot of ways, a unique snowflake, and we've got to look at some ways and some options for you You know, what works for other people doesn't necessarily work for you.
Doing this kind of work, does it draw on your compassion a lot, or is it like powerfully draw on your compassion, or is it really ultimately and honestly better to keep your compassion at a distance, because in the end you might look into the abyss for too long and fall in?